perfectly innocent man who substituted himself for all the guilty. And by the way, that's you and me. So what do you think would be the most famous trial in, the past 50, maybe past 100 years? Some might be thinking of 1925. I know that's a long time ago, 99 years, the way I have it figured. My math is generally not very good. Am I right, Joel? 99 years? Okay. You don't know either, huh? I think that's right, though. 1995, the Scopes Monkey trial there in Dayton, Tennessee. Clarence Darrow on one side and William Jennings Bryant on the other side. After that trial, the theory of evolution began to be taught in our public schools. Maybe it's the Nuremberg trials following World War II. Leaders of Nazi Germany were put on trial for their wartime atrocities and crimes against humanity. Or maybe you're thinking more recently, another famous trial in 1995, the O.J. Simpson trial, right? You all remember the famous black glove, Johnny Cochran. If it doesn't fit, well, you must quit. Exactly right. Famous trials, right? Famous trials all. Whatever trial it is, certain words come to mind. In fact, these words come to mind. They're the most important words in any trial: guilty, innocent, and free. Every trial hinges on those three words. So we're going to use these words to frame our understanding of the most famous trial ever, a trial for the ages. And this trial took place in Pilate's judgment hall. The day, well, we all know the day, right? The day would be Friday. The time, well, the time was daybreak, about 6 o'clock or so in the morning, pretty early to be up for a trial. The accused is Jesus of Nazareth. The accusers, that would be the chief priests, the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Senate of 70. The judge is Pontius Pilate. And the verdict? Guilty, right? Guilty. What happened in Pilate's judgment hall that fateful Friday? Evil happened. Real evil. Evil coming against the only man who ever lived, that it could truly be said he didn't deserve any of it. And yet all of that evil was put to use by the living God for good. Right? Your good and my good for the good of the whole world. Guilty, innocent, and free. This is how we're going to unpack the most famous trial ever. We're going to look at three major players in the text from Luke 23. There are three of them. Two of the major players, they are guilty of evil. They do evil. One of them is innocent of any and all evil. We begin with the first guilty. That would be the chief priests. We met them last Sunday, didn't we? Their evil was the blind ignorance of unbelief. They hated Jesus. Jesus had claimed authority as God's son and as the true king. Jesus rejected the way the chief priests thought about God and about one another. Jesus leveled the playing field for all people, shutting down all comparison, teaching the chief priests that the only way to know the true God is in complete humility. So the chief priests, they hated Jesus, and now they have led Jesus before Pilate. And there they accuse Jesus. These evil people accuse Jesus of evil. They begin to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." He stirs up the people from all the way from up north down here in the south. All throughout Judea, the chief priests, they accuse Jesus of subversive activity. They accuse him of treason. He's declared himself, Pilate, he has declared himself to be a king. He has set himself up as a rival to Caesar. He is a revolutionary, stirring up the people to revolt. They want Pilate to believe that Jesus is guilty of treasonous activity and receive the death penalty. Doesn't happen right away, does it? Pilate decides to send Jesus to Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee. That's where Jesus is from, right? And so Jesus falls under his jurisdiction. The chief priests continue to accuse Jesus before Herod. Herod questions Jesus, but Jesus makes no answer to Herod. They cannot convince Herod that Jesus deserves to die. So Herod mistreats and mocks him, but he doesn't think that Jesus deserves to die, and he sends him back to Pilate. But that doesn't stop the chief priests, doesn't stop the evil. They keep coming. They keep demanding Jesus' death by crucifixion. They say to Pilate, you know what, we'd rather have that murderer, Barabbas, rather than this man, Jesus. The chief priests, they accuse Jesus, and they demand that he be crucified. Through word and deed, they meant everything for evil. The blind ignorance of unbelief. Evil in the world. Guilty. That's the chief priests. We also see evil in the second major player, and that would be Pontius Pilate. Pilate is guilty of evil. He's the Roman governor of Judea and Samaria, and as governor, Pontius Pilate, he has the power of imperium, the sole power. The only person in Judea who had this power of imperium. Imperium would be the authority to decide death penalty cases. That authority is Pilate's and Pilate's alone. Pilate holds all the cards here. You lived or you died. According to Pilate's judgment, there was no jury, just the one judge, Pontius Pilate, the governor, the procurator. Rome doesn't let the local leaders, the Sanhedrin, execute anyone, and so Pilate himself, he has to authorize any execution that is going to occur. He holds all the cards. So the chief priests, they bring Jesus to stand trial before Pilate. It's early in the morning, about 6 o'clock. These people, they have been up all night. Jesus has been up all night. And according to Roman custom, the governor would open court. He would hold court at 6 in the morning. Turn on the coffee, splash some cold water on your face, and let's get going. The Pharisees were there, the Sadducees were there, the chief priests, senators, they're all there, and they have Jesus right where they want him. We finally got this Nazarene right where we want him. Soon, very soon, they're going to have Pontius Pilate right where they want him. So Pilate asks a question of Jesus. I mean, that's what a good impartial judge does, right? He asks questions of the accused. And Pilate asks, well, are you the king of the Jews? You see, the Jews, they didn't want to accuse Jesus before Pilate of claiming to be the Son of God, right? Because Pilate would have just dismissed the case in the crowd. That was a theological issue, not a political issue. That would get the Jews nowhere. So they accused Jesus of claiming to be a king, a rival to Caesar. So Pilate asks this question, are you the king of the Jews? The operative word there, of course, is king. King meant political leader. King meant the head honcho, the CEO. But to the Jews, king was Messiah, a spiritual leader, a Davidic king. So the Jews they're trying to convince Pilate into thinking that Jesus is a Roman kind of king, because then Pilate would kill him. But it doesn't work that way, does it? Jesus responds, you've said so. And whatever Jesus' tone of voice was, Pilate reads it as a no. And so he says, I find no guilt in this man. Now, if the world were a just and honest place, if powerful politicians always did what was right, that would have settled things right there. But it's not, and they don't. And it didn't. Pilate began to move toward committing great, great evil. And here is where Jesus then where Jesus is sent to Herod. Maybe Pilate is looking for some information from Herod. Don't know. Does he want to shift responsibility to Herod? Who knows? Whatever the reason, off to Herod he goes, and Herod isn't convinced by the chief priest's accusations either. So he mocks Jesus and beats him, and he sends him back to Pilate. And Pilate proclaims to the chief priests a second time, "I do not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him." Pilate knows, and he knows that Herod knows, Jesus does not deserve to die. But the chief priests gather all of their voices and all of their forces, and they shout, "Crucify, crucify him." But Pilate stands firm, and for the third time, he declares that Jesus is not guilty. Why? Why do you want me to crucify him? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. But the chief priests and the crowds, they keep coming. They keep pummeling Pilate with shouts of demanding crucifixion. Pilate's now, he's got this mess on his hands. He has to handle this situation delicately. He can't afford to lose control of what's going on and see a riot start. That would be very, very bad for him professionally. So what does he do? Well, he thinks that he can appease their bloodlust by having Jesus punished, right? St. Luke writes that, puts these words in the mouth of Caesar, of Pilate, "I'll have him punished, and then I'll release him." And that'll be that. Now, Roman history tells us that most victims of crucifixion, they would last about 70 hours or so on the cross. It was a very slow and horrific and hellish death. Jesus lasted how long? You remember? 6 hours. What might that tell you about what Pilate had ordered with this punishment? That punishment, that whipping, that scourging almost killed him. Pilate went over the top with this punishment, hoping that would satisfy the Jewish leadership, but it didn't. They wanted more. They demand Christ's death. And Pilate finally gives in to their demand. He plays the cards that only he held, the authority that only he could exercise. He decides that Jesus will be crucified. His choice to send an innocent man, the innocent man, to death and crucifixion is every bit as great and evil as the screaming voices of Jesus' enemies. There is no doubt, Pilate knows that Jesus does not deserve to die. So what an evil thing that St. Luke describes. Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and for murder, for whom they asked. But he delivered Jesus over to their will. And what is their will? To kill the innocent Son of God, to kill the true King, to kill their Messiah. What kind of world is that? It's the same kind of world that you and I live in today. The evil, stubborn, blind ignorance to God's chosen one, the resistance to God's chosen one, the evil of powerful people who knew the facts and who know what's right, and yet, for whatever reason, choose not to do it. Guilty. That's Pontius Pilate. Guilty of evil, condemning Jesus to cruel death. Finally, we come to the only innocent person in this trial. That would be the one accused, right? The innocent person, that is Jesus. He's proclaimed innocent by Pilate 3 times, but Pilate's cowardice condemns him to death. Death on the cross, death by crucifixion. Pilate held all the cards, right? Well, yes. And no. Acts chapter 4. Luke is writing this. It takes place after Good Friday and after Easter and after Ascension and Pentecost. The same enemies of Jesus are now the enemies of Jesus' apostles. They've been arrested and released with a warning. And here's what Luke writes in Acts 4, verses 27 and 28. In this city, that's Jerusalem, there were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod, Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your plan, O God, had predestined to take place. Was it evil? Did the power players do evil? Yes, they did. Was God caught off guard? No, he was not. He had planned it all in advance. Did God take the evil and use it for good, even though no one could see or understand what was going on? Yes, he did. The true king, the innocent one, Jesus, seems like anything but a king. In these verses in Luke 23, he looks like a pawn, right? The power brokers just kind of moving him around here and there. But that's not because God has not planned to stop the evil. God had no plan to do that, but to take that evil and actually use it against his innocent son. God took that evil. The evil that the people who were doing it and that they deserved and that you and I deserve. And he brought that evil against the king, against Jesus. And Jesus took it. He took it so he could take it away from you. The evil was deadly. The chief priests had their way. Pilate did the deed. The evil was strong, and it went with Jesus into the tomb. But God is stronger still, and Jesus rose from the dead, leaving the evil behind, having taken all that evil away from you. That is the plan that God had predestined to take place. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave you and me? Well, amazingly, it leaves me, the guilty. It leaves us free. It leaves us free. You see, Jesus endured more than Romans spitting and mocking and scourging and the nails and the spear. Jesus endured the gears of God's grinding justice. God's grinding justice. What's that? Well, sometimes people, even we Christians, are tempted to think that forgiveness maybe works something like this. God looks down at us and he says, you know what, that's no big deal. This time I'm just going to kind of look the other way. I'm going to give you a pass this time. Well, that's not how it works, is it? If you're talking about the real God, the God of the Bible, this holy and just and righteous and sovereign and all-powerful God, he cannot overlook sin, any sin, no matter how small, no matter how large. Sin must be punished. The gears of God's grinding justice. God has given his verdict, placed the verdict that you and I deserved, and given it to his Son. And that verdict is guilty. Guilty as charged. So it's correct to say that Jesus substituted himself for the world. That is absolutely correct. But it is life-changing to say that Jesus substituted himself for me. My sins, they are many. His mercy is more. Stronger than darkness. His new every morn. My sins are many, and they are all placed on Jesus. But his mercy, his liberating mercy is more. It is so much more. His mercy is what frees us. And the Bible is filled with this gospel promise that we are free. Psalm 146, verse 7, the Lord sets prisoners, that's you and I, the Lord sets prisoners free. The law of the Spirit of life has set you free. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Free. That's you and me. That's what this sermon is finally all about. It's all about being in shackles. There are a million ways to become a prisoner to evil, to be guilty of doing evil, a million ways to become bound and shackled by evil. But there is only one way to be set free, and that way would be Jesus. Only Jesus, the innocent, dies for the guilty. The righteous one dies in the place of the unrighteous, in place of you and me. You see, history's most famous trial actually includes us, all of us. Guilty. Like those chief priests, like Pontius Pilate, like Barabbas. But like Barabbas, we're set free. We are set free. Revelation 1:5, beautiful verse. Let's read this together. Jesus has freed us from our sins by his blood. Freed from our sins by his blood, free from the condemnation of sin, free from the pain of the past, free from all of our worries about the future, and yes, free from the fear of death. No one can take this freedom from us. No law can stop it, and no power on earth or hell can destroy it. Guilty, innocent, free. Words that are used at every trial. Which one of those words would be transformative? Which one of these words brings us life? That's easy, isn't it? Free. Free. That's us. That's you and me. God used the evil at this most famous trial for good, for our good. God still does that with evil today. He uses it for your good. Amen. Let's stand and celebrate.